Hey friends, perfectly competitive firms sell exactly the same product as all of the other competitors in the market. So in terms of characteristics, perfectly competitive markets have many different firms that sell the same homogeneous product. And this means that perfectly competitive markets usually have low barriers to entry, with many firms experiencing high degrees of competition with each other. Individual firms have low market power and they are price takers, meaning they cannot set their own prices and can only accept prices that the market sets for them. Honestly, examples of true perfectly competitive markets are quite rare in real life, but I guess one example could be a farmer's market that sells identical crops. So for example, you can think of a farmer's market that sells only rice, and you are a rice farmer, and all of the farmers around you in this same farmer's market also sells rice. So what does this mean in terms of prices that you set for your rice, your revenue, and your profits? This diagram that you see in this particular screen helps explain your firm as well as your market. The graph on the left over here shows the demand and supply for rice in the farmer's market that you operate from. And the graph on the right over here shows the demand for your individual farm's rice. Notice that you are a price taker, and therefore your individual firm, as a farmer, accepts the market-determined price of your rice. Demand for your rice is also perfectly elastic, and this is reflected in the diagram as a horizontal line. In other words, you can only sell your rice at this price PE, and if you try to raise your prices, nobody would buy it. And this means that your firm cannot influence price and has no market power. So this diagram and this price are reflected in this right diagram as this label, D equals to P equals to MR equals to AR. Your total revenue will be the area under the curve of the actual quantity of rice that you manage to sell. So it is in this region over here, depending on how much rice you manage to sell. So continuing the example of yourself as a rice farmer, one question you may have is, how do you go about making profits? Well, perfectly competitive firms like rice farmers have two types of profits. We have what we call the short run profits on the left and the long run profits on the right. So in the short run, you could potentially enjoy abnormal profits or experience losses. And this is reflected in the three diagrams that you see over here in this screen. But in the long run, you can only enjoy normal profits. Why? Well, let's explore the short run profits first using these three graphs. So in the short run, the firm has at least one fixed input. You can recall the definition of the short run from our previous video. And this means that we assume the number of rice farmers in the market remains the same. So now imagine you manage to find a way to sell Q1 amounts of rice. And we reflect this over here in the leftmost diagram, Q1 amount of rice. Here, the average cost per unit of rice sold, which is reflected as AC, is lower than the average revenue per unit of rice, which basically is at P1, right? And this is where the two dots are in this diagram, the average cost and the average revenue. So what this means is that you make an abnormal profit per unit of rice, and this is reflected in the leftmost diagram as the yellow section, as the gap between points A and B multiplied by the total quantity sold. So that's the logic for abnormal profits. The middle diagram for normal profits and the rightmost diagram for losses reflect the two other profit scenarios that you could potentially experience as a rice farmer. So for the normal profits graph in the middle, this shows the scenario when the average cost covers the price of rice perfectly at Q2 to net you a normal profit, or when the average cost is higher than the price of rice at Q3, so you make a loss. This should be AC3, and therefore you make a loss. And this is the logic for the short run, whereby you could potentially experience abnormal profits, normal profits, or a loss. So now let's move on to the long run. And if you recall from the earlier videos, in the long run, all of the inputs become variable and all inputs can change. So now what this means in the context of this rice farmer example is that the number of rice farmers in the market can change because new farmers and new firms can either enter or leave the market. So as a result, perfectly competitive firms can only enjoy normal profits in the long run, as reflected in the graph over here in this particular screen. So the graph on the left reflects the individual firm's price, costs, and revenue. And the graph on the right shows the supply and demand curve for rice in the particular industry. So one question you may have is that why can firms only get normal profits in the long run? Well, when all inputs can change, this means that when new rice farmers see profitable rice farming, or when they see existing rice farmers making profits, they enter the market to also enjoy some profits. And when existing rice farmers make losses, these rice farmers have to close down and leave the market. So these are also reflected as shifts in the supply curve. And what this means is that in the long run, firms' profits and losses are eliminated and revenues are just enough to cover the costs. So all of the firms in this perfectly competitive market achieve normal profit. And here we see that the price, which is reflected as this horizontal line over here, is equals to your minimum average cost over here. So this also means that allocative efficiency is achieved among perfectly competitive firms in the long run. Here we see that the MB curve, which is actually the demand curve, is equals to your MC curve, the supply curve, at the point QI, where the firm is producing in the long run. And in the long run, allocative efficiency is achieved at the firm level. And at the industry level, social surplus is also maximized at the points QI. So in fact, perfect competition is the only market structure whereby firms achieve allocative efficiency and social surplus is maximized.